This is my LGB 2071D, which I purchased a year or so ago. It's a 1980s model, and I installed DCC sound and smoke. Here you can see the speakers on the left in their custom box, and the motor cover cut away, and the decoder fitted in there in the middle under the boiler shell.
As usual, I'm halfway through a project and I decide I'll video it, but hopefully it'll still be useful. This is the chassis of my 2071, which has the clamshell motorblock, I think it's called. Basically it splits right down the middle, is the whole chassis of the engine, and that's the only way to get the access to the internals where the brushes and axles are, and the gears if you want to look at them. So I already had pretty well finished, I had finished the engine and it was all done, and I hadn't split the motor because I'd operated on the internals using a soldering iron down through the hole there, keyhole surgery. But when I've got it on the track, it keeps shorting out, and as it moves around the track, it's fine on a little straight test track, but on the layout it keeps shorting. And it's not bad track because if you turn the power off, it holds for 3 to 4 seconds, so that's working, the capacitors. So it's shorting because it stops dead and the sound stops, and it could be stops instantly, and then if you move the engine from side to side, for example, give it a push, it reboots. So I'm pretty sure it's shorting out, so I want to make sure the brushes are working.
This is a flashback to before I did the conversion, and you can see the metal strips which run right through the locomotive from the cab floor here right through the top of the motor block to the chimney in the front, and that's how all the wiring's done. So I stripped all that out in order to convert to DCC. Here you can see the motor with the cover off and the brass strips which were in there, and from those strips further strips went down into the motor block and contacted the brushes and so on. So I cut those strips and left them in there, but took the metal strips off the top. Seemed to work, but not 100%, so I think the things are not as good as they should be down in there.
So what I've done is I started off dismantling everything. So from the top, there's 4 screws on the motor cover. I have to get that off, and I've noted down the colours of the wires. Then there's this little black piece which holds the trailing truck in position, and that's got 2 screws in it, so that's got to come off because that joins the 2 halves together. And then there's also this one which keeps the trailing truck under control as well with its screws. And there's a washer I found when I was doing that. I'll see where that comes from. Took the front hook off. That's not standard, I put that on, and so I did that. It depends on if yours is modified or not. I think originally it's got the chimney going right through with the hex nut on the bottom, so you'll have to take that out to split the motor. The front snow plows go across, that you need to take that off. I don't mind because I've already split the snow plow in half to put the coupling in. And next there's the to take the right hand side off, you've got all the valve gear and the motion, and you can see here I've taken that off, and that's in one piece because this plastic bridle here goes right across underneath the engine in one piece. The valve gear is attached to that. So what I did was, from the center crank pin on each side, I've unscrewed the little half crank there and the conrod from that axle, took that off on both sides, and then the whole thing pulls out from underneath the motor, and these rods come out from the cylinder and the valve chest. And that all pulls out in one piece, so hopefully that'll be easier to put back in. I took some photos of it. Then there's these two extra pieces that are on each side hanging down. They just come off. Then, getting close now, I put all the... So what we've got so far, there's the motor with its two wires. I've unsoldered them so I can work on it. Trailing truck with its two wires unsoldered. The smoke unit, its wires. That's a black beam at the back of the cab under the floor. You'll need to unscrew that when you're taking the cab off. There's the little servo for the guard and the fireman, they're out, and that's the motor cover. So that's modified there, some of the weight on the front of it, and a cutout where the decoder goes in the middle, and it's also shortened slightly from the original, with the 4 holes and the saddles where it goes down onto the motor and holds it in position in the gearbox. That's all there. So those are all the bits that have come out, as well as the cab and the boiler, of course, and the chimney. So they're all out. So put those back in my box. Try not to lose anything. So then we had to try and open the motor. So I took the conrods off on one side because the wheels on at least one side have to come off. So I took the wheels off on the right hand side, saved those with the screws and washers and the rod. And then I took the wheels off that side by unscrewing the center screws. The screws like that there, you can just see, it's just a slotted screw. Be careful when you lift up the screws that the brushes don't spring out, but when I did it, only the center axle brush came out. The other two were still in there, so there got missing springs or broken springs. Though it was supposed to be all serviced when I bought it a couple of years ago. So tried that. There's no screws under there or anything, and the axles are all off, but the motor still wouldn't split. And so checked over and can't find anything still holding it together. So what I then did was to take the wheels off the left hand side as well, and so I left the conrod on. That's under there. Left the conrod on it and just unscrewed the center screws, pulled the whole thing off, watching for the brushes. One brush came out, the center one. The forward brush had half a spring on it and came out fairly limply, and the rear one didn't appear at all. So again, springs, I think, And this is the axle. The center axle doesn't have any gears on it, so that just came straight through. So here's the engine with the left-hand side of the all the wheels off and the axles and so forth. And lo and behold, I've taken them out now, but there are 4 screws. When you open it, you see there's 4 screw heads under here, obviously holding the motor block together. And they're behind the wheels, so you can't see them until you take the wheels off. So hopefully I'll be able to split the motor now, and so I can get to the brushes and the wiring. Previously on this engine, which is obviously has only 3 wires through it, so there's no 4-wire connection for putting DCC. So this engine, though it's all stripped out now, had 3 silver straps, or bus wires, a bit not silver, brass, a bit like there's a little bit of it here, you can see. And those 3, 2 on one side and 1 on the other, went right down from the chimney, which also supplies power to the chimney, and then the smoke, through under the motor cover, and then down and across the floor of the cab, and connected at the back of the cab to the wires up to the roof, to the inside of the roof. So, and that's a 3-wire connection, so all the lights and everything in the motor track power are all in one. So I stripped that all out, and attacked the wiring inside the motor to get the power to it. So that's all gone. The objective now is to check all the wiring inside the motor. What I did was the brass strips had extra pieces which dropped down into the motor, and so I cut them off at the top and soldered wires to them, and it seemed fairly good. But when it's in motion and moving on curved track, it was shorting out. So I've got to go right down and wire up directly to the brushes. So let's see if we can split the motor and progress to the next stage. You can see now it's starting to come apart. It may not have been apart for 40 years, so we'll see, being early 1980s, but we'll progress a bit more. I'll see if I can find something which is not undone. Yes, there they are, 2 more screws. The screw which is loose is the one that holds the motor cover on. Next to it is another screw which goes right across. I think it's only on one side, there's no head on the other side. I've never undone those because that, again, it holds the 2 sides together, and I didn't open it. There's 2 there, yep, 2 screws. We'll undo those, see how we go. Okay, well, here we go. As soon as those last 6 screws are undone, the motor splits quite straightforward. So here we got, that's the left hand side, and most of the innards are stuck on the, that's the left hand side, yes, that's the left hand side over there. So we've got the gears there, it's the brush, missing brush, so there's one set of gears there, and the other ones are on that side, just by accident, I guess, where it splits. But we'll have to see the wires now. So We'll work out where the brushes go and how to solder onto them. So where previously these tabs went down, were on the outside, but not a good reliable system. So yeah, it doesn't look bad. I'll do a bit of clean up and see how we go. Just a little update where I've got to so far. I haven't had much time to work on it. So I think where I was last time we talked, I had all the wheels off and the gear, and I was just about finally found all the screws, 6 different screws. And once I had done that, more or less it's at this stage, once I had done that, I found the motor block split in half quite straightforwardly. So I got that half there, that half there, and inside it's reasonably straightforward. I have done a little bit of tidying up since I did this, but basically you can see that's the cab floor, and there's the centre there, that's the brush for the back wheel. There's the driving axle and the gear for the back axle. That's the hole for the axle for the centre axle, and with its brush there, and the forward axle. So that's the front there, you can just see the half circle for the chimney, forward axle and the brush for that. What I did find, these brushes here in the, well, all the brushes when you open it up are the sort with a spring. It's about 40 mil spring, fairly light, easy to close, not a high pressure, with a separate little brush on the end. And I've got one here, I'll show you. Okay, here's one of the brushes out of the that work on the back of the wheel rim of the forward and rear axle. So you've got this brass tube. It's got and inside the spring goes in, and the brush is on the end, sticking out of the that. So the tube is in the side of the chassis, and the brush just sticks out the end enough to touch on the wheel. Not a problem. On the inside of the motor block, the other end of the chassis, the brush tube is in here. Looks like that. Comes out there. But it's an open tube, so there's no end on it, unlike what's there now. So what happens is the original mechanism for the on the screen, the original mechanism with the brass strips running along the top of the motor and these brass strips going down into the motor block, that brass strip has legs going down, and that fits on the back of that, and that holds the spring in place and contacts the electricity. And so when I cut and rearranged those strips, they were a bit loose and were probably moving around inside the motor block. So I don't want that now, because a short or anything is no good. So I didn't want to use that mechanism of the brass strip covering up the hole. Now on the other side, the brushes on each side are in slightly different positions. So on the other side, you can see here, I'll get my finger around the right place, here there's a little pin which sticks up, and that pin matches the brush on the other side, and so that pin pushes on the other side of this brass strip and holds it in. And on this side there's another pin, which is there, that one, and that pushes against the brush on the other side. So that's fine. I just mentioned the centre axle has a similar arrangement, but the brass tube has an end on it, and so it's not open-ended, because here is where the motor sits, so there's no way for brass strips to go down towards there. So that brush is slightly different, is not open-ended, but it still has the spring and the bush inside it. What I found when I opened up is that 2 centre axles were okay, and 2 of the others, but 2 of the brushes, one brush had no spring, and the other one had half a spring or broken spring. So I needed to repair that. Didn't have any spare springs of any size that would fit, and nor could I buy any at short notice. I'll get some in perhaps from the US, but I didn't have any local contact. What I did have is some brushes which I had bought to fit onto some carriages, so I could run lighting, and they're from LGB, a little plastic bracket, and some brushes which screwed in or held in that plastic bracket and have springs. There's a captive spring and a brush inside, and that goes against the back of the wheel. So I'll pull one out and show you what they look like, because I've used those for the front and rear axle. Because they fit and they've got springs and brushes in them, brand new, and also I don't need to worry about how to keep the spring inside on the inside, because it's a captive spring. So here on the left is the new type of brush that you get for picking power up on a wagon or a coach, so it's the same dimensions as the old one, but there's no opening on the inboard end, and on the outboard end the brush comes out, but it won't come out past the full position. So I've just soldered a lead on the back, quite simple, and that's a press fit in there. And now, so the brushes are in, the wires are attached and leading up, and I had to drill a hole to get the wire up from the centre axle through this moulding here. But that's all looks good, and I'm just about ready to start reassembling, and I'll wire all the leads, solder all the leads together to provide one track power lead afterwards. And on the other side I've got the same arrangement with the leads, and they're all black on the left hand side, of course. So that's about it. It's been quite a couple of days working that all out and deciding what to do with the brushes and the springs, but it's all coming together. I'll use these existing brushes in the centre, two of the existing springs and brushes in the centre axle, but the front and rear axle I've replaced with the captive type of brushes, because I only had 4, and I think that it should be quite satisfactory. because the brush on this end is captive, so it's not too difficult. I'll put a bit of plastic in between, or some insulation in between, because the brushes on both sides are very close together inside, and I don't want any movement to cause them to short out. So I'll just put a bit of insulation on them. So that's the 2 days progress, 3 or 4 hours progress, but it's looking good. All right, let you know how it goes. Okay, well, I've done a few things and we're about ready to bring the two halves back together. The brushes are in, or the forward and rear brushes in, the others, the brush holdings, brush tubes are in, with all the wires soldered onto each one. I've brushed out any dirt and so forth. There's a bit of grease left, but that's fine. I've added a touch more new grease on the axle there, and this one, and the little small axle tubes, axles for the gears there. So that all looks pretty good. The other thing I've done is just in these spare spaces here, I've put another 10-gram fishing sinker, one there and one there, and one there and one there. Just a little bit of ballast, a little bit of extra weight, which helps with the traction, as I find my locos usually slip rather than stalling, and keeping them out of the way of the screws, which will go in, like there, for example, there's a screw comes in from underneath. But we're all ready to go back together, I think, so we'll just do that now. Oh, before I did that, I did double check that when the motor's in, it sits in there, and the worm gear drives on the top of this gear, and then that turns the axle in the opposite direction, and the same on this end. So the gear on the motor, both the gears run in the same direction, obviously, and so when that fits in there, both axles go in the same direction when the motor's turning forwards or back, so that's fine. With the axles, front and rear axles, the end of the axle is got flats on each side, and at the opposite end it's at 90 degrees, so that helps greatly with the quartering of the wheels. Although in a model, of course, it doesn't really matter if the wheels are quartered on the opposite sides, because that well, it might help a little bit with the center axle. The center axle gets its power from the rods, so probably is good. The other thing with these is that that axle can come out. I'll just show you. So I could pull that out and put it in the other side, and the axle itself, pull that out, put it in the other side, and then put the gear back on. And so the gears can be on one side of the loco or the other. I've tried it out, and when the motor turns, the wheels turn the same direction as before. So whether it's designed like that or that's a function of physics, well, I suppose it is, but you don't have to worry about which side the gears go on. So in fact, I'm going to put them on the same side. I can't remember which side they were on when I opened the loco, so I'll put them on the same side, and that will help. So that keeps this space clear because there's no gear on this side. Keeps that space clear, and when the wiring comes, I'll lead both the wires up through here because they have to come up through this space. So it keeps them a bit clear of the gears. There's no room on either side of the motor to get the wires up, so I've run it up through here, and that should just clear the gears. I think that's about it. Well, ready to go. I'll show you when it's done. Okay, well, in the end I decided to join up all the wires from the brushes and the trailing truck, or join them all up into one wire. Do that before I put it back together, so I had a little bit more access to cut the wires the right length and strip them and so on. So for example, here is the trailing truck. I put new wires on there, so I've got the red on the right side instead of the left, and a black wire on the left rather than the blue wire on the right, which is original. And lead that just comes up through this hole here, so that doesn't need to lead through. I could have drilled through here, but don't need to do that, I think. Then there's the wire from the rear brush, the wire from the center brush goes through a hole there and up the back of that panel, and the wire from the leading brush there, and they all join together to this lead, which will go to the decoder, and the same on this side in black. So should all be ready to go now, and let's do that. It's coming together. The trailing truck underneath is giving it a little bit in the way, and I need both hands. So I've done it once. The axles just pop in on the opposite side, and these little axles for the gears, they wiggle around and pop in, and the whole thing pops together. So I'll just have to put the phone down to do that. Okay, so there it is, back together. Not screwed yet, but just placed together. You have to lead the trailing truck wires up. They go across the underneath the firebox there. I've just cut a groove to run them through, then underneath the start of the motor cover joins, and then there's one wire on each side. You have to pull them apart to drop the motor in. There's nowhere else to run through. And then the two wires for the track left and track right for the decoder. So it's looking good. I'll start to screw things back together, make sure things are turning and so forth. So back in a minute. Okay, well, proceeding. All the screws which hold the block together are all back in, and I've also put the trailing truck back on. I took that off at an earlier stage than the reassembly, but because the wires are connected now, I don't want it flopping about, so I've put that back on. One thing is in here, I can get a bit more light. In under there, you see that horseshoe shaped bracket that joins to the two sides together, but its primary function is to support the upward pressure from the trailing truck. And you can see there's a little, like a piston that sticks up and bears against that bracket. Now that little piston moves up and down, and it appears from the diagrams that there should be a spring in there, which wasn't there. So I've used a bit of spare brush string, or another spring, slightly heavier, to go in there, and then refitted that back on. So there's that horseshoe bracket and that one, the straight one there at the front. So that's gone back on, and provides a little bit of downward pressure on the trailing truck. So when it's going over the track and so forth, it puts downward pressure on it and helps to stop it leaving the track, I guess. And because there's a pickup on there also, it helps keep the pickups. So okay, now comes the left-hand side wheels, which the last ones I took off. I left the conrod on, and so it should be a matter of lining those two up at the right angle, and the all the wheels lined together, and by looking where the position of the counterweight, it's easy to detect that they're in parallel, but it doesn't need to be too exact, I found. So I'll put that on now. Because when we're preparing to put the wheels back on, don't forget the brush and spring on the center axle, a bit of grease on the other axles, and a bit of conducting grease on the brush spring, and some grease on the center axle, which goes in that hole. Well, I've got the wheels back on. So with the weights at the bottom, the rods are at the top, and the flats on the axles, ends of the axles, run along parallel. So you've got to line those up as the wheels go on, at the same time holding the brush down in the middle. I'm glad I don't have to deal with 3 brushes. That one is enough. It's gone off about 5 times. So you've got to hold that, put the brush down, and then hold that with a screwdriver or something while you do everything else with one hand. And even then, because there's nothing on the other end of the axle can lift up, and so the brush even there tends to push up that wheel. But so when I turn it over, I'm going to put a block of wood under there, or a clamp, to hold the axle in and the brush while I do the other side. So let's see how that goes. So a block of wood on there and turn over. Okay, piece of wood under there, brush is still in, bit of electrical conducting grease down here, and some normal grease, wherever it is, here it is, on the axles. And the wheels. So these ones, I've taken them out, I've taken the rods off, so I can put them on one at a time, which is probably simpler. And they've still got the bolts in at the screws in the center. Okay, so here the slot is vertical on this side, and I noted before that the counterweights were to the rear, while the other side was at the bottom. Okay, so good. And of course I've left the brush off, so that's got to go in there. That's how it looks. You'll notice the spring's got a narrower end, and that's the end that goes on the bush, and the bottom of the bush has a narrow piece which fits into the spring. Probably works all right if you don't do that, but that's what it's supposed to do. So I'll need 3 hands now, so I'll put the camera down for a moment. Okay, so that's that one wheel on. Probably best to do them individually, but I was a bit nervous about taking the rod off on the other side, but that's not a big deal. And use the ruler to hold the bush down while I'm putting the wheel on, and then I can pull that out. So that's looking good. I'll put the other wheels on, and we'll see where we're up to. Okay, that all worked. I'll leave it for the moment. Okay, next thing's put the rod back on. So, of course, one arm of the rod's longer than the other, which is to the front. We'll go on there, yes. And I'll find the screws and the washers for that. So, put those on. Yep. The rod's back on that side, so should rotate all right. There's a slight noise from that front axle. It is turning freely. Might just have to bed in after a little bit of running in. I'll see. I'll make sure there's nothing rubbing under here. Okay, I guess start fitting the rest of the pieces back on. But the motor block all appears good. I can't really test run it until I've got the, I could use a 12 volt power supply. I'll do that. I'll put the 12 volts on and see if everything runs. Right, get back to you when I've got that ready. Okay, well, where it was yesterday, got all the rods on without the valve gear just to test it, and I connected up to my old DC controller just directly to the motor leads, and seems to be going all right. Just a bit of adjustment, and yep, so that all works. As I said, I've got my DC controller, my old DC controller, and I've got on the positive side, on the right hand side, I've got the orange motor wire and the red track wire twisted together. On the left hand side, I've got the negative power from the controller going to the negative motor wire, but on the positive side I've just got the lead, and I'm going to touch it on the wheels, and it should pick up the power and go straight through to the motor with DC. So it's working just on that wheel. Same on that one, same on that one, and in here under the trailing truck. So I think that's showing that they're conducting. It could be conducting from one wheel to the next using the conrods, but I don't think they're electrified. No, they're insulated from the wheels, so that doesn't do it. Just the wheels, the wheel rims. So that's looking good. So that should give a good distribution of power going over points and things. So should be working much better than it was before. All right, it's a matter of starting to reassemble, connecting up the wires to the decoder, putting the decoder back, and I've got to put the rods back. I'll do that first, and the valve gear, do that first, and a few bits and pieces like that, show you that, and then just reinstalling the motor and so on, the decoder. I'm tidying that up a bit, shortening some of the wires and so on. Just a bit of tidy up, and again I'll show you that as I go. Okay, thanks. Just show you this bit now. So I've just put the motor cover back on. So I led the 4 wires to the decoder out through the front, and I've screwed the motor cover back on with those screws there, one there and one there, and there's 2 on the other side. And you can see where I've cut back the motor, not the motor block, but just the top part of the motor block and the motor block cover that used to come back to here. So I've cut about 1 centimetre off and the back, and about 1 centimetre off the front, without affecting any of the functionality. So that gives me an extra centimetre up the front for the smoke unit, which goes here. That's the ESU small smoke unit, but it's still quite large. It's about 40 mil long, and the speakers go across there. 2 speakers in a box, so that goes across there, and that's I needed that extra space. And across the front there, that's one of the weights that came out of the original boiler. So by putting it there, it's good and central, and it leaves space for the decoder across here. Okay, just putting the valve gear back on. So that comes all in, the valve gear on both sides joined together by this plastic bridle. So that goes there in between the front wheels and the centre wheels. You can't put it right in. This piece here goes inside the cylinder, and this little black rod goes inside the valve cover. So you just got to get that in and leave the rods and this half shaft loose. Leave that till you do the other side. So that's in, and this one's got to go in here. Just push it all back to get that in. It goes in there, and then this just goes back in there. It's just a push fit. It could be glued, but it doesn't need to be. And then this bar here, there's 2 lugs underneath, and that should push down into the bottom of the motor block. And then these 2 brackets on each side should push into place. Yeah, that's the forward slot of the 2 here towards the front. Now it's just a matter of connecting those rods back on. So the half shaft on the half shaft and the end of the conrod going onto that pin there. Okay, so I'll do that now. Just putting the valve gear back on. It's all in position, and the rods are back in the valve cover, the black plastic rod, and the chrome plated rod goes into the cylinder. But at the back half we've got the conrod and this half shaft. So the fitting arrangement is, you should also have 2 washers and the screw. The screws on all the wheels are the same, so don't worry about that. So that goes on first, no, washer first. I will check the diagrams later, but I'm pretty sure that's the way it goes. So first washer, the rod, second washer, and the half shaft, and the square hole in the half shaft goes on the square top of the plastic pin. That should fit on, and the half shaft points back towards the center of the wheel, towards the main screw, so it doesn't go like that. It doesn't go around like that, for example. It goes on the square top of the red pin, and points back towards the center of the axle. So valve gear's back in, and we can start with the top. One little piece, these brackets. This is the right hand side one, so that should be right. Right and left are different, so that goes in underneath. And just clips on that little slot there. Doesn't actually do anything, it's just part of the mechanism. And then one on the other side. So I'll do that, and then I'm ready to start work on the top. Okay, I'll put the decoder mounting board, speakers, new little legs on there, touch higher to give room for the sound to come out. The adapter board back in, shortened that wire for the servos, it was much too long as supplied. Speaker, the wires for all the lights that come out of the top of the boiler, and that's the adapter for the smoke unit there, so I can take that out when needed. So it's a little bit neater than it was before. That's the new wires from the motor and the track. They go underneath the board and screw on that side. So if I need, I can lift it up like that, get the underneath. So it's not too bad considering there's 28 wires going to the decoder board for all the functions and the speaker and the motor and the lights. So I'll put it on the test track now and see that everything's alright before I put the lid back on. So it's all running, all the lights are working, sounds, smoke, driver changes direction.
So all good, all good.
Okay, we're on the track, and again through the points, no hesitation whatsoever. I gave the track a quick clean, but not much. So going really well. Turned on the smoke and put a bit of fluid in. It's looking good.
That's the small ESU smoke lid which integrates with the decoder. That gives the chuckle effects. And let's try and buy another chimney cap. I've got one on order, but it's a bit slow to arrive.
Oh, driver just fell out. Must have caught his arm on the door or something.
So that's the project completed. All been going really well. So bit of a success in the end. Okay. Thanks for watching.